we have Dean Ostdiek here with us, and also Dean Hutchinson. My name is Philomena Bradford, and I am the chair of the working group. We are going to have our first meeting after this forum on Saturday at 2 p.m. So everyone who applied to the working group, look forward to that, and we'll discuss what happens here at the forum, and also our objective, which is writing an essay resolution.
So the way it's going to work is the deans are going to kind of start off by explaining a little bit of background on what policies, resources, and process. Each of you have comment cards on your chairs, and so if you have questions related to those things, go ahead and write them down. And then on each side, we have runners, so Jared on that side, Angie on that side, and they'll be kind of circling the aisles and passing towards the outside. And we just want to kind of answer those questions possible, so we'll kind of categorize them by policy, process, and resources. The questions that are not answered at the end, we have written down so that we can get back to you at the end or at a later date. And then depending on how it goes, we'll open it up if we have time. Are there any questions at this time? Okay, we'll get started.
And we'll try to limit all responses to like a minute for each question. Do you think that's doable so we can get through work?
Okay.
Wonderful.
Check
Right to the point.
Okay.
So you guys can just start.
Oh, you ready for us to start? Okay. And in the back, are we actually picking up on the microphone? And video, are you guys getting this okay? I get 2 thumbs up. Excellent. Okay, I don't get that very often. First, on behalf of both of us here, let me thank you for coming tonight. Let me also, I'm going to have to guess that I am apologizing on behalf of Dean Sanders, the Dean of Graduate Studies, who had also planned on being here with us this evening. She emailed this morning to say that she was suffering from a stomach illness of some sort or another, but she would still be here. I didn't hear from her again, but I'm going to take it that she wasn't feeling well enough to send an email of regrets. So it'll be Dr. Ostdiek and me rather than also Dr. Sanders. Again, I want to repeat my thank you at the outset here because I think it's vitally important that we get widespread education, understanding, awareness on campus of the resources which are available for mental wellness, the symptoms of students who are suffering perhaps from a psychological or an emotional problem that may be impairing their ability to study so that we can support each other in those regards, and that we know how to reach out in support of those students. We actually, right about a year ago right now, began conversations about trying to have a campus-wide discussion about mental health and about mental illness and about the resources available for each. And we, in fact, carried on a conversation, including led by a number of our RHAs, to produce some programming that led to the Wellbeing Project that was launched in September. The purpose of that project was, in many regards, I think, the purpose of this forum as well, and the purpose of the working group going forward, which is to make sure that we have the resources in place that we need, and even more importantly, to make sure that people are aware of those resources so that they will use them when they need them. I think we all share in common here this evening that our highest priority is the safety and well-being of all of our students. And therefore, what we have done is to put in place as many resources as we possibly can to provide the support for students who are in need. I think for background, it's worth knowing for those of you who are maybe haven't been here since maybe everybody was seniors. Most of you have known me as the Dean of Undergraduates for your entire time at Rice, but actually I've been the Dean for 2.5 years. One of the very first things that I did when I became Dean was to appoint Don Ostdiek as Associate Dean and ask him to take over responsibilities that include the Wellness Center, Support and Retention, and the Counseling Center, many of the resources that we are here to discuss tonight. Amongst the things that we did during our first year working together was really do a very detailed assessment of what we thought about the processes by which we deal with students who are in crisis, the resources which are available to the students who are in crisis, the decision-making processes that we have available to us at those times, changing the organization by which we bring people together to discuss students, who may be in crisis or maybe just in need, to involve more people, including the college masters, in those discussions, and fundamentally to look at the available resources in the counseling center to make sure that we felt like that we were adequately addressing the needs of the campus. Roughly, would you say a year and a half ago, between a year to a year and a half ago, we actually began a pretty substantial expansion and reorganization of the Rice Counseling Center, support and retention and wellness, to both expand the resources available and provide greater diversification of the resources available in the center. Very difficult to put a marker on exactly how much we have grown, because it's not just an increase in staff, it's also been a restructuring of the center. At a bare minimum right now, we have, or will have as soon as we have completed our staffing, an increase in the available resources for students just in the last about year of about 30%. And we'll find out if that's adequate, and if it's not, we will keep building forward from there. The diversification that I mentioned a little while ago includes the hiring of, in addition to our clinical psychologists, a group of clinical social workers who have the ability to help students manage their processes, reach out to the appropriate resources both in and out of the university, and to help manage a student, particularly those who are in need of hospitalization, to get the care that they need and then to manage their transition back to the university. We are in the process of hiring right now a full-time psychiatrist who will become the director of the counseling center as soon as he can come on board. And we anticipate that transition beginning effectively immediately. So each of you will have the opportunity to engage with that psychiatrist as the need arises. So there have been quite a few changes which have taken place over the last, say, year to year and a half. And I just thought it was important to sort of set the context for that in terms of the questions that you have, the concerns you may have, that in many ways we've been listening to those concerns for 2.5 years and have been responding to them for the last about year and a half as we have gathered the resources necessary to respond to those changes. And we can always we can always improve beyond that point as well. I don't know, Dr. Ostdiek, did you want to add to?
That's a pretty thorough review of what we're doing, but I think that's the point. It is a work in progress, and change doesn't happen immediately. This is something we've been doing for the last 2 years, thinking about it, working on it last year and a half a lot more aggressively, and it's something that's going to continue. With these discussions, without these discussions, any other way, our commitment is to keep improving, keep changing the mix, keep improving the sort of systems that we have available. So it's an ongoing work, and your involvement and feedback is a crucial part of that as we move forward, because those decisions are being made, and the services are hopefully going to be improved, and with your input, that's the best way for us to make sure they're improved.
Let me add one other note about change which has occurred. So I know that some of the concern has to do with the resources available on campus. I also know that some of the concern has to do with how we work with students who are in crisis and how we make decisions about what the best trajectory going forward is for a student who may be experiencing a crisis. And actually, over the course of about the last year to year and a half, we have been revising and updating our procedures and protocols for dealing with students in those circumstances as well. We know that some of you have concerns based upon some of the things that you have heard, and we can answer and explain our processes. In fact, I think it's very helpful for you to know those processes, because we don't want people to be afraid of those processes. We want you to trust that we have your best interests at heart, that whatever decisions we are making because we are concerned about your safety and well-being, and because we are dedicated to your success as Rice students. And as a consequence, the more you know about how we may work with you, or may work with one of your friends who may be in a difficult situation, I think the more readily you will turn to us to let us give you the help that we believe that you will need. With that, would you like to begin with questions?
I will.
So, this question was submitted online. How soon can we expect a public, accessible, and clear posting of the current policy, resources, and processes related to Rice regarding sexual assault? I understand this is the Wellness Health Forum, but I think that this could also be pertinent to...
for the entire evening, I think we're both happy to answer
Okay,
questions. Having to do with
wonderful.
processes and resources available for victims of sexual assault.
Okay, wonderful.
Absolutely.
How soon can we get the same for mental health? Is there any way that we could get a benchmark of reported cases of sexual assault at the moment? Is there any chance that we could put in place a contact or a resource specifically for sexual assault victims or survivors? Some kind of counselor or contact person that has the accessibility of RHAs, if not IUPD. So a lot of questions there.
Okay. Can we pick up the last one first because I remember it best? So the question there had to do with, and I do have the printout of the questions you provided. So the last one is, trying to find it here. Any chance we can put in place a contact or a resource? Yeah, found it. So actually, that was an idea I heard first back in December, and I think immediately, it was appealing to me. I think that's actually a resource that we need. Dr. Ostdiek and I actually have had conversations with representatives of the Houston Area Women's Center to reach out to them, having to do with sort of their best advice and their best resource for ways in which we might engage them as a support service for our students. Now, we have not put anything in place yet because these conversations are in the early stage, but one of the possible ideas here that I actually think is a fairly strong idea is that we engage them for counseling, for support, for advocacy, for students who have been victims of sexual assault, because quite frankly, they have the best expertise in the city. This is what they do for our community, and that Rice could form a partnership with what we think are the real experts in this area, and let them be a sort of an independent means by which students can have some trust in the individuals that they are working with. We have not worked out any of the details of this approach yet, but my contention we met with the CEO of the Houston Area Women's Center, as well as their chief program officer and their chief education officers, and in discussing this idea, I think their conclusion was that if we didn't partner with them, that we were likely to hire away their best people, so they were inclined to want to form a partnership with us rather than have us raise them. So, would you like to expand on that at all?
So we have agreed in principle with them that they do want to help us. They do want to provide a counseling availability for survivors that can be called on immediately or any time during the process. And so one of the discussions we'll have with them is how do students from Rice access that? And I think making it more available rather than less available is what we'll be looking for, whether it's through RHAs, RUPD, through the masters. I think one of the things we want to have is multiple points of entry so that you don't have to go to any one place to access that. And presumably, again, the details have to be worked out, but if it can be done even with a separate phone call where you contact them directly, we can make that work. I think we don't have any problem with that as well.
And let me address then the first and second questions. I think it was about 3 questions or so. Right? So the first question actually had to do with public, accessible, and clear posting of the current policy, resources, and processes related to Rice regarding sexual assault. That's actually posted in a large number of areas, but of course, consistent with what Dr. Ostdiek just said, if we need to post it in other areas, we can do the same. It is part of our sexual harassment and sexual assault policy. It's part of our code of student conduct. It's posted in the student handbook, so it's online there. It's actually posted in every restroom on campus currently, both what our policy is, who the contacts are, what your immediate responses might be if you've been assaulted. But one of the things that we could work with the working group on is identifying other ways to get the information out. Clearly, we want it to be the case that any student who has been sexually assaulted knows to come forward, knows that we will provide support, knows that we are here to help, and knows that we will follow up with all dispatch and seriousness to make sure that their case is addressed. And anything we can do to get that information out is absolutely crucial to us. As regards mental health and resources, again, we have the webpage for the counseling center. If the public is telling us it's not a good webpage, if it's not a good source of information, then let's build another one together. Again, our goal is to make sure everybody knows what they need to know so that regardless of the situation they are in, all the way from mild to critical, they know where to go and how to turn, who to turn to, where to find information, so that they know how to get in touch with the appropriate people to get the support that they need. I think we're completely open to the suggestions of this group. We're definitely open to the suggestions of the working group about how we can do that most effectively. This is all about making sure that our students have the support that they need to know where to turn, and particularly if they have been victimized, to know that we are here to support students who have been victimized.
Well, a little bit more.
Yeah, that's a bit longer than a minute, but go ahead.
Oh, that was longer than a minute. You're right.
Yeah,
I admit I forgot the minute.
There was multiple questions though too. One of the other things that we'll do with Hawk, besides the training, the counselor aspect, is actually having them work with us for more training for students. And that's one way that people will learn about the policies and the resources that are available more readily. One of the obvious places for that is when you first arrive at Rice. We can't keep cramming more and more and more into O Week, but something definitely has to be said during O Week, and I think Hawk will help us with that, leading the trainings. And then I think we can't just leave it there, so we're talking to them about how to structure their training for that first month. If you guys remember back to your first September, with all sorts of things, it's life changes a lot in that first month. We need to be giving you information and having resources available throughout that time period. So I think the other thing we can do to make the policies and the procedures and the resources more widely known is to have more of these sorts of trainings and have them occur in different sorts of venues, whether they're college-based, in your O-Week groups, through your RHAs, through other sources. We're going to try multiple ways to be bringing the training to you. We'll be bringing some of these trainings to you at night in the colleges. We have staff now who will be coming, starting later this semester, coming in at night to do some of the sorts of trainings as well. And Hawk has agreed to help with that along the way. So I think you'll start seeing a lot more activity because it's an easier way to expand the resources that we have, is to bring in these experts. Instead of using current resources and retraining them, we can bring in the people who already have the training, and I think that'll help solve a lot of the issues that we have.
Yes. I have a question from the audience. So Hawk is the Houston Area Women's Center. The question specifically is, what about male victims of sexual assault?
Yeah, Hawk, there are male victims of sexual assault at Rice that come forward, and of course there are ones that go unreported as well. And we spoke to Hawk about that training. It is for everybody. Male victims of female sexual harassment or assault, and male victims of male sexual harassment or assault. There's no distinguishing in the training, so it will be addressed. Yes, and we've talked about that explicitly already.
So, this is from a student. As a student returning from medical leave, the university requests access to information from my mental health professionals. Whatever benefits of doing this, does the university recognize that this may affect what I choose to reveal to my mental health professionals, and may even provide incentive for me to not be open or honest with those professionals? And does the university recognize the potential damages of such policy? So this is a very specific question to the mental health policy that we have in place.
The answer is that we have to have a clear understanding of what it is that we are looking for when we want to have contact with your mental health professional when you are at time away and are ready, or you're ready to petition to the university to say, now's the time that I would like to come back. And the answer is very, very little. In essence, what we are looking for is, are you, the hypothetical student who's away, are you now ready to meet the expectations associated with being a Rice student? Can you manage your life? You were apparently in a crisis before. Do we think that the crisis has passed? Have you addressed the things that have come up with you? And in general, the kinds of questions we ask is, did the student make contact with you? Have you seen the student regularly? Is the student intending to maintain a relationship with you or with another counselor going forward upon their return? Not really much more than that. So we're not trying to find out even, what was the diagnosis, what was the treatment, what were maybe underlying precipitating cause. We don't ask any of those questions at all. So when we ask for a release, and I've got some of my staff here who can maybe help me with this a little bit, we're asking for a limited release. It's not for a total release of all records. And mostly what we're saying, and actually this is detailed and articulated in the specific letter that each student leaves at the time that they depart, that simply says, we didn't know whether you have followed up with your therapist, and we didn't know whether or not you have made contact with your therapist, and we may ask for a letter from the therapist to simply say, yes, I'm seeing the student, I believe the student is ready to return. Depending upon the circumstances, we may go back with a somewhat more specific question on our end to say, these are the circumstances under which the student left. Are you aware of that? And do you believe that the student is now ready to return? It's pretty minimal sources of information. But I do agree with the student who wrote the question that if students don't trust that, then they may undermine their own therapy and thereby undermine their own path back to wellness. So it's really important that we have good, clear communication and education with the entire community so that people realize that we are not trying to pry into people's personal relationships with their individual therapists. We don't do that. We wouldn't do that. Actually, our therapists would be extremely unhappy if we were attempting to do that. What we're asking for is simply enough information for us to be able to assess, is the student ready to return? I think that was maybe closer to a minute. Okay.
How would you handle an occurrence in which a student had a completely overwhelming situation and as a result had a complete mental breakdown? Assuming that student had already exhausted all resources such as the counseling center and
So, for those of you who didn't know, the questions were provided to us ahead of time, so I have sheets in front of me where I'm reading the questions to sort of remind myself. That question I actually spent a lot of time thinking about, how to answer it. I know the answer, but the answer is embedded in the cases of the students that we have met over the last year or 2 years, because there is no general answer to that question. And in fact, the circumstances described here are pretty darn general. And instead, we actually respond on a really case-by-case basis. So the beauty of Rice is that we are small enough that we can do that we can look at each individual student's circumstance and try to determine what do we think the best path going forward is with the student. In the overwhelming majority of the cases, we involve the student in that conversation and leave, actually in most cases, the decision in the hands of the student to decide, what do you think needs to happen here? So the words here that are used in the question are an overwhelming situation that results in a complete mental breakdown. Well, those circumstances describe an entire spectrum of possible scenarios in which a student may have had something external happen. They may have had a change in their own health. They may have simply succumbed to significant stress. Or they may have had what our clinicians here call a psychotic break, which is a very, very serious mental illness condition. And depending upon that wide spectrum of things, some of these things may pass quickly. Some of them may require hospitalization at the opposite end of the spectrum. So I can't give a general answer to that question other than to say every case is treated case by case, involving as many people as possible in the discussion of what best advice we can give to the student moving forward, including a recommendation that taking some time off may be in their best interest when that is the most advisable course. We bring in everybody on the sort of the staff side of the team that includes college masters who may know the student and may know the circumstances around that student. When it is appropriate, and it is not always appropriate, we may involve the parents in the conversation as well, depending upon the exact circumstance that led to the hospitalization. The pithy answer is that we try to figure out what the best path back to Rice will be at the end of whatever the event has been that has led to the student's crisis, and to determine, do we think that the student is going to be able to manage themselves and manage their work at Rice in the short term, or would they be better served taking a longer time away from Rice and really addressing a fundamental problem which may have arisen? Or are we dealing with something that is really quite serious and may require even hospitalization, perhaps even for an extended period of time? Of course, let me make sure that it's clear that you understand that Rice cannot hospitalize anybody. The law won't let us do that. We don't make a decision about hospitalizing a student, but we will work with the student about getting that student hospitalized. That we will work very hard in some cases to persuade a student, you need to be in a safe location where you're going to get the care and the attention that you need to get you through this crisis. Because otherwise you may not be safe, even in the short term or in the long term.
I have a question just regarding that. There's a lot of discussions and conversations going on based upon this decision. My question is, who makes the ultimate decision? And do you feel that person, it may be you, is qualified to make that decision? So,
first, the person who, in the vast majority of cases, the person who makes the decision is the student. And in many of those cases, the decision of the student is, I think I'm okay, I want to stay. In which case, we may advise the student, this is probably not going to go well. We don't think this is a good idea, but if you want to give it a try, we'll provide you the support that we can, but just understand you've been through a very difficult time here. In many other cases, the student will say, I need some help here. I need to take some time off. The overwhelming majority, I'm going to say that this is a number, if I count both the students who don't withdraw and the students who do withdraw, well over 90% of the students who go into some situation where we think perhaps a withdrawal would be appropriate. It's a very small percentage of cases where, given very specific criteria, the university vests, particularly, it's on me as Dean of Undergraduates to make a decision if there's a student who I need to decide is not in a position to continue as a Rice student. Those criteria are, is the student at risk for themselves? Is the student at risk for other members of the community? Is the student unable to comport themselves in such a way as to not disrupt the ability of other students to maintain their lives as Rice students? Those are spelled out actually in the general announcements. The last little question had to do with the qualifications. What I can tell you is that I have been engaged in decisions of exactly this type since 1994. I have seen dozens of them. But I don't do this all by myself. I have a whole team of individuals that includes Dr. Ostdiek, who's been involved in this for a decade. I have clinical counselors who are involved in these decisions. RUPD is trained in mental health issues. They are involved as well. And we also include the college masters who themselves may have more direct contact with the student involved. But in the end, somebody has to make the decision. And the first choice is that we leave it in the hands of the student in every case where we possibly can. And in a very, very small minority of the cases, I may have to make the decision myself.
What research have you done to compare Rice's wellness resources with our own peer institutions, and how do we compare?
So, 2 years ago, when we really started to look at how we handle these issues on campus, one of the things, we made a couple of changes right away with our mindset. And one is to try to view the whole issue more holistically and view it a little bit less like separate offices and look at well-being at Rice. And one of the resources we have to bring to bear at Rice to help student well-being, and that well-being kind of occurs along the continuum, from students who have really serious issues all the way down to students who might just need some education, some help, and then a lot of space in between. And the question we have is, how do we array the resources we have along that continuum to serve students? You can have a couple students on one end who have some very serious problems consume almost all the resources. You could have, resources that serve a lot of students, but those students don't necessarily need them. So that's part of the judgment that we have to bring to bear on the problem. What we did was went to a person at the university, used to be at the University of Chicago, running the health center, the wellness center, counseling center there, and now works for the National JED Foundation as a national consultant. And I've worked with him regularly to talk about what we have at Rice for resources, what our problems are. He would use his experience working with counseling centers, both at Chicago but also nationally around the country, and we would work together to find what the right mix is for Rice. there really wasn't much comparison of, we aren't in an arms race with other schools as to how many should we have, or he did look at our staffing and talk to us about how it compares to other schools, and he thinks our resources, again, he's used to our peer institutions, he says our resources are very adequate, compare very favorably. We're well resourced to do what we need to do. How that compares directly to any one school, we just never looked at. We've been more focused at trying to deploy the resources in a way that helps solve the problems. Clearly, we do need to expand because we've been expanding students. We've been growing. And in Rice, and under Dean Hutchinson, we've been adding resources. We've added staff members in this area. It's the area I work in and hope to build. I think we'll add more staff over time, but that's what we do as we build and grow a program. The main goal, though, is to make sure that it's adequate to cover what needs to be covered in a way that is spreading the resources in a way that makes sense. We don't do that alone. We do that with some outside advice, and so far it's been very helpful, I think.
Are accommodations offered from the Rice Disability Center for students with mental illness? For example, lenience on participation and attendance requirements. How does that work?
So I think that's a great question. That one I actually was fascinated by when I read it. As a professor, I've never actually gotten a letter from the Disability Support Services Office on behalf of a student who is requesting an accommodation on the basis of a mental illness. I've gotten it for a variety of other disabilities. I just never received one for that point. That doesn't mean that it can't happen. To the contrary, the Disability Support Services will provide the support as needed by them. They are the ones who make the judgment on both is an accommodation needed and what accommodation would be appropriate in each case. I think that it would likely be treated in the same way that some other medical conditions are treated. For example, if there's an acute episode that may take a student out of action for a little while and make it impossible for them to come to class or do a homework assignment, such that an extension of time is appropriate and so forth. We get those kinds of requests routinely. Thank you, really appreciate it. Fundamentally, though, it is important to remember that the Americans with Disabilities Act provides that we will provide reasonable accommodations such that a student can meet the expectations of being a Rice student. In other words, it's still the responsibility of the student to be able to do the things that we expect a student to be able to do. In the end, you've got to do your work. In the end, you've got to be able to meet whatever the definitions of the course are that are defined in the syllabus. You've got to take the exams, write the papers, come to class, participate, etc. So the question is, what is a reasonable accommodation for students who cannot fully meet those expectations without some particular accommodation? I know that we would provide those if they were requested, but I think the vast majority of the cases where this arises, I think it must be because the students are talking to individual faculty. At any rate, this hasn't come to me. I don't know, as a teacher, have you seen it? Yeah, I've not seen it. I don't think that means that it doesn't exist. I think it means that maybe it's not being utilized. But it's also important to realize what the support is that is provided by Alan Russell and his office, which is, both a definition that this is a disability requiring accommodation and that this is the reasonable accommodation necessary to help the student be able to meet the expectations of being a Rice student.
I think also, if I just touch on one more thing on that topic, I think for the short-term sort of accommodations where somebody's going through a crisis, maybe they have a brief hospitalization, maybe something's happening, and we're taking care of that, and then they're going to be back in class. Rice already has a really good system to handle that through the Dean of Undergraduate's office, the retention, through the master's. And so it's not uncommon for us to already be contacting faculty and discussing workloads and accommodations informally for the process and not have to go through DSS for those sorts of accommodations. So I think we're much more likely to see that than a long-term sort of accommodation.
Yeah, I think that's right. Both in my history as a college master as well as in my role as a professor here, there's common correspondence between college masters and faculty saying, I'm writing on behalf of the following student who may be having a serious illness or maybe has had an event take place in their lives. Please give them all possible consideration as regards deadlines and assignments. And, I don't ever remember a rights professor ever responding to that and saying, no, I won't do that.
A question from the audience. What is the university's goal in expanding such resources as counseling and practice? Is everyone that is referred to such services or applies to use these services able to be provided with appointments sufficiently soon enough?
Well, actually, the first question answers the second one, right? So our goal would be that would be true, that anyone who needs to access these resources would be able to do so in a timely fashion.
Right. I think the question is also asking, if I may,
Yes,
that if right at this moment, if I call the counseling center, will I be able to get an appointment within a week, within 2 weeks? And is that then considered that the resources are sufficiently meeting my need? Because there's a lot of words that are being thrown. Like, for example, what does sufficient meeting of need mean?
Right. So
how are
I
we
think
defining these things?
let me answer about the question on how quickly you can be seen. The one thing that I can guarantee you is that if we know that the situation is critical, you can be seen effectively immediately. That we reserve times in our counseling center to see people who have urgent needs. That if we have a student who we have concern is in an unsafe situation, we're going to get that student into a safe situation immediately. So let's set that case aside and then ask, if I have a student who has not an urgent concern but has a serious concern, how quickly are they going to be able to be seen? I mentioned at the outset that some of the ramping up and diversification of the services that we've had has been relatively recent. So if I point back to even, say, the early parts of even the first half of the fall semester, the data there is not going to tell us what the data is going to be going forward for the rest of the year. But I'm sort of looking at the back row back there to my staff and wondering whether we have any current estimates. Is that a possible question to answer?
Sure. Well, if somebody, I'm Elizabeth Highway, one of the therapists at the counseling center, and if somebody is to call in, the first thing we do is do a little brief telephone conversation with you, just to kind of figure out what it is you need and think about the various resources on campus and what the best way to help you would be. And we try to do those with actually same day if possible, if not within 24 hours. A limiting factor is how busy you guys are, how many extracurricular activities you have, and that kind of thing. So it is our goal to do that within 24 hours, but sometimes the student is unable to do that because of their schedule.
Yep. So I think a longer, more challenging answer to the question really has to do with what our expectations are for having a Rice Counseling Center. Why do we have a counseling center on campus? We sit sit across the street from the world's largest medical center. We sit in the middle of the city of professionals here. There are huge resources available within even a short walk of campus, let alone a short drive of campus. And yet we choose to have a counseling center made available, and we are spending your money and making the decision to have a counseling center on campus. So clearly we think that there is a function. But I think it's really worth us having a conversation. I think this is one of the real goals that we should have for our working group, is to come to a common understanding and share that information about what are our goals for the counseling center. I mean, clearly some of them are immediate short-term intervention. If we have a student who is in crisis, that clearly is one of our goals. Longer term, to sort of encourage the mental wellness of the campus, individual by individual and even group by group, by addressing concerns that are of particularly unique circumstances for students who come to a college campus. They may include professional stresses, family stresses, relationship stresses, anxieties that may arise, and so forth. It may also, because of the ages of the population of people on the campus, be to help identify emergent mental health issues that often arise for people who are in the age group of college students, and to help identify those as best we can, and then to help the student seek out and get the treatment and resources that they need to begin to deal with the problem which they may not have seen before. Those are essentially our primary goals as we see them. Did I summarize that reasonably well? Do you want to add anything to that, counselors? Anything you want to add to the summary I just gave? And so in terms of the adequacy of the resources, the question is, are we meeting those goals? And those goals clearly require that people be able to get in on a timely manner to address those concerns. Quite different to ask the question, if I'm a student who is suffering from a long-term chronic illness that may require long-term care, what's the best way for that student to get that care? And the view that we have taken is the best thing we can do is help the student identify what their needs are and work with them to help them figure out where they can get the long-term treatment that is required. Because for many of these illnesses, they are things that do require extensive care over a long period of time, and that developing a relationship with the therapist is the most important thing that a student can do early on to begin their process towards wellness. Want to add any of that?
That sounds great.
Okay.
One part, we can actually employ a case manager to help students find that care off campus. If it has to be off campus, that'll work with them on transportation and insurance issues. So it's not just turning them loose.
Okay. This is a very short answer, I hope. What percentage of students taking a medical leave return to Rice?
So we actually had, because we knew this question was coming, we have a little bit of data on that. The answer is, for those students who have voluntarily taken a medical withdrawal, that percentage, of course we're dealing with relatively small numbers, is going to vary in the range of roughly 75 to 85% who return. And most within a relatively short period of time, mostly a semester is, if it probably can't give an average, it wouldn't mean anything, but I'd say the median is going to be one semester for a return. We're talking about numbers 20 to 25 who will choose to take a medical withdrawal each semester. Each semester, 15 to 20 students return from medical withdrawals. Exactly, what the numerator is and what the denominator is going to vary all over the map there. But our history is students who voluntarily take a medical withdrawal to go and address issues that may be arising in their life are far more successful than those who remain in place and attempt to tough it out.
So that number included voluntary and involuntary withdrawals, or just voluntary withdrawal?
Did you want to? Oh,
It's just voluntary.
yeah, I think that's
Just
the voluntary
voluntary?
ones. Yeah, the involuntary ones, the numbers are so small that there's not going to be any statistically meaningful number here. I mean, as we discussed, is 4 in each of the previous 2 years. I was trying to remember
But there's
how
still
many
students.
involuntary withdrawals there were in the fall semester. I can't remember.
The one we just passed?
The one that just passed. I don't think there were any involuntary withdrawals.
I mean, I think each person is I mean, we might not be statistically, I'm an English major, I might not be statistically relevant as a person, right?
Yes.
It's a student that was accepted to Rice that, something about that student was interesting to the university, and they were committed to unconventionalism, right? And so
Of course,
whether
okay,
it's
come on,
4 or
look.
10.
Look, let's be
I mean,
reasonable.
it's
Look,
still-
be reasonable. You asked me for numbers, and what I'm
Right.
telling you is numbers, when you're talking about 4 people, are not the relevant issue. Okay? The question is each individual at that point, what is their circumstance?
Right.
Each of those circumstances are so different that giving you a number of responses to that is going to matter. Do you actually want me to talk about each of those cases? I'm not about to do that.
I'm not asking you to talk about each of the cases. I just
So I'm not going to. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. That was a very short answer. I appreciate that. Should we settle for matching peer institutions? And this is concerning resources, mental health resources. How can we be sure to use our unconventional wisdom to make us a pioneering institution when dealing with mental health, especially in the contemporary USA where mental health is obviously a pressing issue?
So, as an English major, you understand the concept of a loaded question, right?
I do.
Yeah, the word should be settled
I'm not a
for.
lawyer,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah.
The term should be settled for is clearly a loaded question that presumes the answer. The question is that we should identify what our needs are at Rice and meet those needs. Simple.
All right, so I'd like to open the floor for questions, if anyone has any more questions. Yes, right over here, right back here. Yeah, can you please stand?
I just have a question about when you guys are looking at students in crisis. What exactly does that mean? Can you give like an example of it? Is this like somebody who's very upset, not going to classes, or somebody who's just like going through like a tough time? Like you said, there's like a lot of changes and a lot of like stuff that's going on. So how do you define that?
You want to cover it?
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, I'll give a break. There's a lot of. Actually, I'll go back to your answer about the point about everyone being unique. The crisis means something different for everybody, and I think that's a good point to say what is a student in crisis. Some of the crises are extremely serious medical crises. Okay, somebody who is having a serious psychotic break or serious other manifestations of mental illness. And so they are extremely, extremely serious. Some of the crises are that students have been victimized in some way and are having a difficult time coping with it or understanding it or knowing what to do. Some of the crises are personal, existential, about what they're doing here, whether they're happy doing it. Some of those crises relate to extreme depression, where somebody can't get out of bed and take care of themselves. The crises, again, in 10 years of doing this, the extent of the crises that we see is so incredibly variable and so incredibly personalized that, that we see all sorts of ones. To a student in crisis, they're all crises, and we agree, we try to interact and help. But that's one of the reasons then we try to bring a diverse set of people to bear with Dr. Hutchinson's experience and my experience, but also with multiple counselors from the counseling center, multiple staff members, and the police and the masters and all sorts of people who see the students in all different settings to kind of get a more of a 360-degree view of what that crisis is for that student in their life and how it's impacting students around them in their lives. So we've had students going through manic episodes when they have bipolar personality disorder, for instance, or it just spans the whole gamut, and it's incredibly, it's one of the things that makes this job for a lot of us so incredibly challenging and so incredibly difficult, and ultimately I hope incredibly rewarding. That you get help in those certain situations. But there is not just one answer, and we won't try to. We have everything from medical hospitalizations on down. We try to treat them all with seriousness and respond with dignity and respect towards the student as well.
I think Elizabeth wants to contribute to that answer.
I would just add really briefly, that students sometimes might define crisis a little bit differently in any given day, and that these guys actually wouldn't know about it because of our confidentiality. So we hold walk-in appointments that are available for students that students take us up on regularly. So say you're going through a really bad breakup and you just kind of don't know where to turn, or you need to vent about it a little bit, or you and your roommate got in a really bad fight, or you feel like your professor is targeting you for some reason or something like that. This might feel like an individual crisis to the student, and we're available to even talk about that kind of stuff, and we do that all the time, every day. So these are like the more serious crises where a student might need resources from somebody else on campus to help them out. But if you call into the counseling center and you're having a hard time and you want to come in that day because you feel like there's a personal crisis going on, we can help you with that. So I just wanted to kind of add that in.
And if I can pitch in just a little bit as well, because your question is extremely important. The overwhelming majority, almost all of the students who we may be discussing here have self-identified. They have come to us to say, I need help. And at that point, I think we could say this is a student who's in crisis because they have turned to us for help. There is a very small fraction of students, but they're an important fraction of students, who have changed their behavior in dramatic ways, probably without realizing it. And that may bring them to our attention in other ways. We may get a call from a concerned professor. We may get contact from concerned roommates and friends. We may get a call from parents saying, I don't know what's going on, but this is what I saw, and I'm worried. And that would be the other set of circumstances in which a student would come to our attention. But overwhelmingly, it is students who are letting us know, please, I need some help. And at that point, I think it's reasonable to say we have a student who is in crisis from the standpoint that, it may be that they are just in a situation where they cannot thrive at the university in the ways that we expect. It may be that they are, in fact, simply not functioning as a student anymore, or it may go all the way to the extreme where there's risk to health, safety, and even life. on the extreme end of things. And crisis can span that entire spectrum.
Hi, I'm Kayla Strange. Obviously, there's long-term mental health treatment and there's short-term mental health treatment, and there's large-scale mental health treatment and small-scale mental health treatment. So I was wondering if there's all this emphasis on like expanding, the programs and expanding the resources. Why were some of these more small-scale programs like the massage services and nutrition counseling and some of those smaller level things cut recently?
So the answer there is that we have a set of resources available to support you through the fees that you pay for health services. And part of what we have had to do is to figure out where are the greatest demands and needs for our students to use the resources that you give to us for these purposes. What we did in sort of carefully analyzing the resources made available is to determine, how much impact are these programs having versus how much more impact would these resources have if we redirected them into other areas. In other words, the desire to expand these services and the way in which we've met the desire to meet those services. And in some cases, they have to cut back on other services. That, there's administrative decisions we have to make there about how we best think we can serve our community. It's a zero-sum game.
Yeah, apart from the new psychiatrists that you talked about,
I'm sorry, I missed what you said.
apart from the new psychiatrists that you talked about, should we be looking for any other specific changes in the coming months?
Do you want to comment on?
Well, I think you'll see more of the programs brought to you in the colleges. More of those will be educational, sort of still presented by licensed counselors or licensed behavioral educators, but they'll be brought to you where you're at and be a little bit more relevant that way. I think you'll also, over the next year, I hope you'll see more group sessions available to students that are actually group therapy sessions and not just workshops. I think you'll see more, again, on the outside education brought in by Hawk and that sort of thing. I still think we need, I think you actually will see more counselor hours available in the councils, in the colleges. I have some counselors who are willing to come some evenings and have just a meet the counselor session, not necessarily a scheduled appointment where you'll do therapy, but where you can stop by and talk to them. So right now, I think having the diverse resources available at different settings, and finding out, if no one shows up to those workshops, if no one uses those hours, we'll stop doing them. We'll find other ways. And right now, we need to find what's the right mix as we try to kind of deploy those resources across the different modalities that are available. I think right now the next step has to be, kind of the first step for us over the last year and a half was solving a problem we had in the area of hospitalization. Again, it doesn't impact a lot of people, but the impact it does have is so huge. We have to solve some of those problems and kind of restructure some staffing issues. And now the important point is bringing the programming out to students and see if we can engage you in a different way, which is why we try to hire some different types of therapists, some with social work experience, some different experience in their backgrounds, so they're used to going out in colleges and contacting students. So,
can I? One of my own top priorities is that we treat the mental wellness of our campus as a public health issue, and that we address it with many of the approaches that are used in public health campaigns that involve, awareness and education and outreach as a community-based factor, so that we understand ourselves and we understand each other and we understand the ways in which mental illness may manifest itself, and we understand the kinds of effective therapies that can be addressed for students who need some assistance along the way. From my perspective, the single greatest issue we have having to do with the mental wellness on campus is actually not whether or not we have sufficient resources, but actually whether there is sufficient awareness among students of the kinds of things that may happen in their lives and in other people's lives, to recognize what's happening when it's happening and to reach out for assistance. And then in addition, to pursue lifestyles that will encourage mental health. They can include sleep, exercise, nutrition, appropriate choices about the balance of the time that we have in your life, appropriate choices about the numbers of obligations that we take on, and the impacts that those things can have on our lives. So I think over the course of the next, really even this semester, but certainly over the course of the following year, a key priority for us, I think, is going to be to do a public health campaign about mental wellness on the campus. I think that'll be something we will see.
Wonderful. Okay, we have time for like one or two more questions. You guys are going to have
What's the communication like between students that have been asked to leave and faculty as far as like getting back on campus and whatnot? Like, is that like a face-to-face meeting or like over email? And what's the process like for getting back on?
You want me to expand that to students who've been asked to leave, but also include students who have chosen to leave?
Yeah.
Yeah, basically any student who has left for a medical reason, what is the process by which they return? So two things are true. One is we have a support and retention office that basically, that's their primary job. They are there to assist students with understanding the process by which they will depart and understand the process by which they will return. They're a source of constant communication. They know what needs to be done. They communicate face to face. Some of these students will contact either me or Dr. Ostdiek individually or the counseling center individually for information about the process along the way. Right at the outset, when the student chooses to leave, they get a letter from me, very carefully done, and some of it is standard, some of it is very individual, that says, here are the things you need to do for yourself while you're gone, and here are the things that we will look for when you're ready to return, and stay in communication with us all the way through. For my retention folks, anything you would want to add to that?
I guess just one more thing. My name is Kate Noonan. I work in student retention. We work with all students one-on-one, as we've talked about throughout tonight, and really try to understand what questions they have, address those as quickly as possible in person, over email, whatever's most convenient for the student. And really for every student, we talk to them about that roadmap back to campus, if Rice is where they want to be. And like we talked about, most of those students do come back and are successful. So really we talk to them about that path back to campus and help them during their time away so they can prepare to be back.
And if I could just advertise the office as well. So Kate introduced herself, and Agnes, I think, sitting right next to her there.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Agnes, and I'm pretty new to the campus. I just started last semester. So me and Kate work at the retention office, which we mainly help students in many different ways. The majority of our responsibility to help students who take the medical withdrawal or medical leave. So if they are ready and feel better to return, they can call us or email us, and we are happy to meet with them or talk to them on the phone. The other thing that we try to do a lot is try to reach out to a lot of students and talk about, overall well-being issues. Well, literally, like if you guys wanted to meet with either one of us, you can just simply call our number, which is 713-348-3311, easy to remember, or just go to the Wellbeing website.
And pretty much they are a point of contact for any student who just basically says, things just aren't going very well right now, and I would like somebody to talk to, and maybe for whatever reason the college masters and the RAs are not the source. They're a great source of advice, contact, liaison. They can help people identify what the next steps may be.
One more question.
There's one back.
Yeah, right here.
Hi, my name is Andrew Howard. I was wondering what you thought of the student, kind of what caused this event, so the initial article in Fletcher, the kind of student feedback and explosion following that, and the rally and everything else like following that. And I kind of want to extend it onto, if you mentioned that you've already been expanding these resources for the past 1.5 years. I don't think students were really well communicated about that and didn't really recognize that. So there's anything that, actually it's more of not really a question but a statement, that perhaps the administration could do more, as I'm sure the SA might agree, with communicating with students about what they do and how they are helping the campus.
So it's an interesting fact, and I'm glad you mentioned that. And let me add as well that I don't think you're here on behalf of the Thresher right now, but you do work with the Thresher. And the Thresher, I think, has done a very good job of helping us get word out about what our processes are and what the resources are which are available. The comment I wanted to make was that we spent the spring semester developing what we thought was sort of a public awareness campaign to help students be aware of these resources, and we launched it in late September with the Wellbeing Project. And I've got to tell you, there wasn't a significant response from the community. There were certainly people who participated, but the turnout for most of our events was pretty weak. So to a certain extent, this has got to be a two-way street, right? I need the audience to want to hear what we had to say. We tried to get that message out back in September, and part of the problem is that most of us live our lives in what is called crisis orientation. We don't think about things until we're in crisis, and then we think about them really hard. And I think that's a lot about what goes on here, is the sort of sense of, yeah, mental wellness, all this. That's not me, right? And so I'm not going to pay any attention to that information at all. And then suddenly it is me. And now I don't know. And now I'm a little upset that nobody told me. The reason I mentioned this is because I think this is crucial to what I talked about in the answer to the last question about public health, as a public health initiative, as a way to get the word out. And public health initiatives are very broad-based, community-based. Everybody participates in that. And I need to get everybody in the community to participate in this educational effort and getting word out. You are right. People don't know. And we need them to know, because we need them to come to us when they are in times of need, or when they have a friend who is in need, or when they just have a concern about a situation that they may see or a person that they may have interacted with. Because we can't help the students who don't reach out to us to let us help them and get through whatever situation they are in.
Okay, so we want to honor everyone's time, because it's getting late. So first off, thank